Hello and welcome to another Ask the Divorce Experts. This spotlight is designed to focus on specific areas that people have concerns about before, during, and even after their divorce. So today I have a special guest that I have had the honor of interviewing before, and she is just a phenomenal resource. I want to introduce you to Sandra Fava. She is the head of Fava Law LLC in New Jersey. She's known for her ability to provide clear, practical legal advice and support during challenging times like divorce. She's a skilled negotiator and litigator, but the thing that I really appreciate about Sandra is she also is very open to having her clients work through alternative dispute resolution forms, including mediation, which can really help to reduce the time and the cost and the stress of divorce. But most importantly, Sandra is focused on providing a really client-centered approach to the legal practice, which is something that we were just talking before we started recording. That's something that a lot of people don't experience. They really feel like they're kind of herded through the legal process of divorce. So, Sandra, welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me again, Marty. It's always nice to chat with you and catch up, and certainly I'm happy to be on the show today.
Well, and I'm always happy whenever professionals, particularly attorneys, come on any kind of podcast or YouTube recording to talk, because going to a lawyer can be a really intimidating experience. The first time I had ever had to hire an attorney was for my divorce, and that was, 30 years ago. And I had no clue what to do. So what I did is just ask my best friend who had just gone through a divorce, hey, who did you use? And I just used her attorney. Now, great thing. It was a good match. Everything went well, but that can also be a nightmare scenario. So I think today we're going to start out, and we may wander off the track a little bit, but we were really going to focus on, if it is your first time hiring a family law attorney, what do you need to know? What should you do? And maybe importantly, what are the mistakes that you want to make sure you avoid?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic because oftentimes clients will come to me and they're already working with an attorney, but they have a list of grievances. And if they had vetted their attorney a bit more, they might not have been in that situation. So, and it's often just what you shared, right? That they have not really had a lot of interactions with the legal professionals in their life. Maybe they've done a simple will or something, but again, usually you go to an attorney when you have a problem. People like to avoid problems, totally normal. And so if they find themselves in a situation where they're going to be going through a divorce process, it's normal that they would ask, a friend or a coworker or somebody that they know who's been through the process, for a recommendation. And that may work out, like for you, perfectly fine. But I think that for the person who either isn't going to do that or wants to be a little bit more involved in the selection of their attorney, do some research, I think that there's a couple of things that they need to consider. So not, just like a fingerprint, there are no two divorces that are exactly alike. It doesn't matter if you've talked to your neighbor or coworker and it seems like their life could be your life. You may have shared experiences, but even the most, what you may consider minor fact difference can be really a big deal in a divorce situation, right? So it's good to have, again, somebody who's been through it for emotional support or some sort of guidance, but you have to keep that in mind. And so when you're looking for an attorney, you have to consider kind of, let's start with like, who am I and how do I like to work with people, right?
Yes.
Am I somebody who's going to be, who generally needs a bit more hand-holding, right? Do I have a lot of questions? Do I get very nervous easily? Am I an anxious person? Do I need a lot of updates? Do I want like very personal daily service? Because if you do, then that should help drive what kind of law firm or lawyer you're going to hire. Are you somebody who says, I'm very tech savvy, I'm very hands-on, I'm going to do a lot of this myself, I'm going to be prepared, I'm very organized, I want to try to save as much money as possible, so I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get into this, or I've been collecting things for a long time and I've already done a lot of research, so I kind of think I know what you need and have that all prepared, versus I have no idea kind of where any of the financial information are. I don't know
Right.
where documents are. I don't know much about our banking or our investments. Those are two very different types of people, and they're going to need different types of resources. So things like that. What are the issues that are particular to your family situation, right? Is this an amicable divorce? Like, has this been something that's been in the air, let's say, for several months or even years, and kind of just waiting for an event to happen, or and everybody's just kind of accepted that, we're here and this is what we want to do, versus, are you somebody who's been in an abusive relationship and you don't have a lot of outside resources and you've been alienated from friends and family and you really are very scared about the process and about how your spouse is going to react if you take the first step, right?
Yes.
Are you somebody who's been cheated on, and so emotionally you're not in a very good space at the moment? You feel very hurt and betrayed, all very normal feelings, but those emotions impact how people behave in a legal setting. We are not robots. We're all human, right?
Yeah.
So, you may be at a place in the process where you're still processing your feelings, kind of wading through them, or you haven't even started the process because you're just kind of in shock. And, that may be very different from where your spouse is at. And those two simple situations, let's call them, really can be a huge determining factor on how your divorce would go forward, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's going to be contentious, maybe it's going to be inflamed for a minute or two, not
Yeah.
um
A
right.
hot minute, as they say.
Yes, thank you. But then, things will calm down because that, generally you have a calmer relationship and this is just in a really high emotional time for you or your spouse. Do you have children that are going to be a part of this process, right? Do you think they're going to be a dispute about custody or parenting time? Are there issues about substance abuse?
Right.
Or again, like I mentioned before, domestic violence. So you kind of have to assess before you even start your search. Who am I? What do I think are going to what are the things that I need that will make me comfortable through this process? And what are the issues that may come up in this process?
Right.
So, a minute of self reflection and self assessment is important. I think people just automatically operate from emotion
Right.
at the start, and that can be a dangerous first step, right?
Well, and I think with what you just said, first of all, I think that was a really clear explanation of that whole what do you need part. But I think the other thing I'm going to throw in here too, Sandra, is you have to be honest with yourself. Like
Yes.
you can't say, I'm going to be, I'm not really organized in my life. I feel like, everything is in a whirlwind and everything is chaotic, but I am going to be completely organized with my attorney. It doesn't work that way. So be honest. If you're struggling, look for an attorney that's going to provide you that, or have a divorce coach working with you,
Right.
or somebody that is going to help you do that, because you cannot wish yourself to be unemotional, analytical. And I said this to somebody the other day, the only people in the room that think that your divorce is a business negotiation is the attorney, the mediator, and the divorce coach, and the financial person.
And the judge.
Yes, and the judge, if you're going litigation. You
Yeah.
are there in the emotions, and you're not going to get out of them. So I
Yes.
appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And it's okay to be in the emotions, but being honest with yourself and the people you're working with will save you a lot of time, aggravation, and ultimately money. And I
Right.
don't think that a lot of people realize that or are told that, by some of the professionals that are involved in their case. And if do your self-assessment, and then maybe if you have the opportunity, check yourself with a sibling or, a family member or a good friend, like, this is what I think I need. Would you agree with that? And they may say to you, like, are you crazy? You know that you can't, get all those documents. How are you going to do that? You have small children, you have this job, you have all these, you have aging parents that you're caring for. You're going to need somebody who's going to be more hands-on, right?
Right, right.
So I think that that's the first step. And then when you're actually out looking for attorneys, then you can kind of be more focused on what you're looking for. So a lot of people will say, in an initial consultation, if they haven't done their homework or their self prep, I want to take everything that they have. I want, pie in the sky wishes, never going to see the kids, never gonna have to live in a shoebox. I'm going to get all the money, I want to make sure that he or she can never go to our club again, all of these things. And you may find professionals who will say, absolutely, we're going to get all those things for you, right? Here, sign on the dotted line, give me your money. And then you're there, 2, 3, 6 months, a year later, and you're saying, hold on, nothing's really happened. What's been going on all this time?
Right.
Right? Be mindful of promises, and people not telling you maybe hard truth. If things sound too good to be true, like anything in life, that is probably too good to be true.
Right.
Right.
I so appreciate you saying that. I get clients all the time that are seriously $150,000, $200,000 in legal
Yes.
fees. Nothing has happened, but there's like 40 motions have been filed. I'm making that number up. I don't know anybody that's
Right.
ever filed 40 motions, but if you hire that super aggressive, promises everything attorney, that you're going to pay for that.
Yes.
Because it is going to be a battle. There's going to be no compromise on that attorney's side. At least that's been my experience in working with clients that have made that mistake. So
Right. Yeah, 1,000%. And then, not only are you nowhere, but you've depleted your, significant assets. And, wouldn't you rather those go to yourself or your children or your grandchildren or whatever your plan is for the future? Because there's a
right,
future. There will be a future that will be different and very positive if you so choose it to be, after this is done. It just feels like, this is the worst thing ever and it's never going to end and it's happening right now. And, all of the fears and all of that are real and they're there, but you have to, try to work with people who can help you work through that and see past that point.
right,
I think another important factor when you're doing this is, like, what kind of spouse do you have, right? Is your spouse somebody who, is very difficult, like, not only with you, but just in general? You can't keep a job because they keep getting fired because they have a difficult personality. They sue everybody. They don't talk to their, own family or their own friends. Are they disorganized and, they don't have any idea of what's going on? Are they somebody who has like a really demanding job and they travel a lot, to be realistic about how long this is going to take and whether that's due to like just the normal course of your life or because they're going to be difficult and do things, right? And it's not, sometimes I say to people, oftentimes I ask, well, they'll say, well, my spouse is a teacher, so they don't make that much money. And I'll say, well, what about your spouse's family? Oh, well, they're really wealthy. Oh, and how's your relationship with them? Oh, well, they really don't like me. And I'm like, well, that's, that's red flags that you should understand that, if that's what it's happening, there's a likelihood that her or his pockets are deeper than what
right,
you're thinking at this moment, because maybe their family will, step up to do this, right? And everybody thinks that they're doing it for the right reasons, but you have to be, realistic about how the process is going to go forward. And then if you decide, okay, I think I'm really going to be in a litigation, I hope it's not going to be too crazy, I'm going to be able to do my part to kind of keep organized and do things. You need to know that the lawyer you're working with, is that's what your belief is, but that they have experience with litigation. Because I think there's a misnomer that attorneys are all the same. Like, if you're an attorney and if your law degree, of course you go to court. And that's not the case. There are lots of attorneys, even those who practice in family law, who won't go to court or don't go to court. They don't argue motions. They don't do trials. They are simply there to negotiate, or they can take it up to a certain point, and then they'll hand it off to somebody else, maybe in their firm or to a colleague, if the case is going to actually be tried. If there's, asking questions like, do you take depositions? How many trials have you done? Do you work with experts? What kind of experts do you work with? Do you appear regularly in the county where my case is going to be venued, right? Do you do arbitrations? Do you do mediations? How much of your practice is litigation versus mediation? If you think you're going to have a conflict, a high conflict or a custody dispute, how many cases do you handle that have high conflict or that have custody issues, right? Because what may often happen is you'll go somewhere, you'll find somebody, you'll really like them, and they won't tell you, by the way, I don't go to court, I don't try cases. And then something may happen in the case that requires a court appearance. And all of a sudden you're working with someone you've never met before up until this point, and you're feeling confused. They feel confident because it's their colleague or their partner or whatever. And they're like, you'll be okay. But you're kind of nervous. And if things don't go exactly as you thought they might be, or what was promised to you, now you're really frustrated and probably angry and upset.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, asking those questions. So I think the last time we spoke, we talked about kind of my career path. So I spent most of my career in big law, working at a big law firm. And then in September of last year, I decided to open up my own practice. And one of the driving forces for that was because as my firm got bigger and bigger and sort of more corporate in its structure and organization, it started to feel like you had less ability to have personal touches with clients and kind of do the practice the way that I really wanted to do. And so to me, it didn't make sense to stay there if I wanted to do things the way. After 20 years of practice, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do and how I do it. And I didn't want to change that because I feel it's very much a part of me and my style. And so I decided to go ahead and start my own firm and create my own culture. So, here, for example, when you come to talk to me about your case, I'm going to tell you, like, this is how I structure my team, right? So I use lesser experienced, lower billing rate attorneys to do some of the behind the scene works, right? To draft certain documents. There may be a court appearance where I would say to you, hey, you don't need me to appear because it's just, we're just going to schedule deadlines for things. So, we should have somebody else do that. You may start working with one of those other attorneys behind the scenes. And maybe, let's say there's a mediation scheduled and you'll say, hey, I'm wondering if so-and-so could maybe handle the mediation, from a cost perspective. What do you think, right? So we're talking about kind of, and from the beginning, because the reality is I can't be everywhere at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't want you to first time meet somebody when you're in a crisis mode, or there's, what you feel are very big stakes on the line. And I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to be out of town on that date. So here's, so-and-so. So I think it's important that people do that. And then it's their choice. So I've had clients, plenty who say to me, that's all great. And I don't mind certain things, but like, I really want you to be the person. You're going to be, and I'm like, okay, so as long as we understand the dollar and cents of that, I don't have a problem with that, right? I'm just trying to give you options here so you understand how we work at our firm.
And I really appreciate that, because I do think so many people, and I've heard this story over and over again, where people go to a large law firm, doesn't matter where they are or what their name is or where they're located, and they meet with somebody who they think is the attorney, who turns out to be like a case manager or an intake, just kind of, that's all they do is get people lined up. And then they're disappointed because they don't know who their attorney is, or they only ever speak to a paralegal or, another attorney in the office,
right?
Or they can never they don't have any direct contact with their their, in quotes, attorney. So
Yes,
I'm guessing that that's not an uncommon situation
not at all.
in the big
Not at
firms,
all.
not in the small little firms. But no, and when I say little, I mean a contained office that really is able to offer that personalized service that we associate with a smaller business compared to a,
Yeah.
big business.
I think that there's probably overlap in all size firms,
Sure.
right? And I think the point of it is to be prepared and to ask the questions, right?
Right.
Like, who am I going to work with? Is this going to be the person I only work with? Are there going to be other people? People ask me all the time, like, will you give me your cell phone number? And I say, no, I'm sorry, I will not do that, because you can reach me on email. You can reach me through the portal that we use, or client share portal. We can communicate through that, the text message through that. You can call the office during business hours, but there's not much I can do for you after
Right.
5 p.m.
Yeah.
Monday through Friday or on the weekend. So if you really have an emergency, you need to call 911 or go to the police station, because those are the people who are going to help you. I'm not really available to do that. And I joke, because I say, I also have my own family, and like there has to be some boundaries. Otherwise, I may end up on your side of the table at some point, and people generally understand that. But that's another thing, is just like the expectations. What are the expectations going to be, right?
Right.
Um, how do you do things? Do you have a net from the attorney perspective? Like, do you have a network? If I, how do you see my case going? What are some of the things that you foresee, after I've told you all these things about my life that may be relevant, that I should be thinking about, right? If you're having an initial consultation with an attorney, even without having looked at specific documents, for example, just based on what information they ask for you. And I often tell people, listen, for the first part of this, I'm going to direct the conversation much like you would at a doctor intake, because this information I'm getting from you is going to be really important when you tell me the rest of the stuff that's happening, so I can give you kind of like my overall 360 view of what the situation is, and what your legal possibilities are.
Right.
And again, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. It actually, because people have so much they want to share, and they're usually not in a great state. So they're like, oh, that's much easier for me, because now I'm just going to sit here and answer your questions. And if, anyone who's been doing this long enough, you know what to ask, you
Right.
know what you're looking for, where the issues are, and kind of, and then you could say, listen, you may actually end up needing a forensic accountant based on what you've told me, right? There seems to be some money that's been moved around or inherited or traced, things like that. Or you have a business. Okay, well, for this type of business, we generally have to have a forensic accountant, because we need to do a value, and you can't just look at, the
Right.
bank account statements or the tax returns. So just getting people kind of overall familiar with what it looks like for them specifically. If you go to an intake and somebody spends 15 minutes with you, that might be what you like, right? You may be that kind of person who says, okay, that was great. I don't want to waste time. I don't want to talk about the other stuff. That'll be good. But I think that that's kind of like a precursor to how your interactions will be going forward with that firm. So you have to kind of think about that, and how you want to be moving through the process.
Right. And I so appreciate this, because this is really specific and really detailed information. Sandra, I do want to ask you something that this comes up more often than I would like it to. Let's say a client hires an attorney. Maybe they didn't do their research. Maybe they, just took kind of yellow page, this is
Yeah.
how old I am.
Google
Look
search.
through the yellow pages, Google search it, or find a name like on the side of a bus or something
Yeah.
like that. And they just hire this person. And then let's say a month or so in, or longer, all of a sudden they realize, wait a second, this is not the person I want to work with. How easy is it to, number one, fire an attorney, and then number two, actually find somebody else that wants to work with you after you've already fired one or two or more attorneys that have been representing you? Can you just talk a little bit about that scenario?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think particularly in the area of family law, it's an important one. So, you can fire an attorney at any time for any reason, at least in the state of New Jersey, which is where I practice and where I'm licensed. So, You don't have to give a reason. You could just say, please transfer my file, or, as of this date, we're terminating services. That's fine. You can hire another attorney. Be mindful that they will probably need to charge you to get acquainted with your file and brought up to speed. They can't just like start from nowhere. So that, you're, in a way, you're paying for a second attorney to do something that you've already paid somebody to do, but that comes with the transferring of attorneys or files, which again, if you're thinking about costs, is important to go back to what we started talking about on this recording today, right? That being mindful of who you choose to work with can save you that, and that can be substantial. If your case is a month old, there might not be that much to the file, and you're not talking about, large amounts of dollars here. But if your case is a year old and you're frustrated, there might be a lot for somebody to go through. And that may eat up an initial retainer, because any good lawyer is going to need to understand what's happened to date in order to figure out how to shift the strategy and, kind of get things going in the direction that you obviously hope for it to be going in. So the longer the time, the more expensive it is. But there's also this other piece that nobody, I feel like, really talks about. When you're in a litigated divorce case, and even maybe if you're not litigated, depending on if you're mediating or arbitrating, and New Jersey's a small state, so, it applies to our state, I would say. If you have gone through multiple attorneys, the people, the professionals, I will say, will start to say, what's going on here?
Right.
And it may be completely justified and valid, but you're still going to have that bias.
Sure.
And I particularly with judges, I have heard judges say, even to me, wow, Miss Fava, you're now the third attorney in this case. And I, as a professional, can't say, well, that's because the first two really did absolutely nothing.
Right.
And I say,
right.
yes, Judge, I understand that, but I'm fully up to speed and I'm ready, ready to move forward. Now, I personally have a rule, if I'm the third attorney and I'm usually not interested in the case, to me, it's more likely that there is a bigger problem that I probably can't help with.
Right.
At that point in time. So I, unless there's like some really exceptional circumstances or somebody I know really kind of needs my help and wants me to be in there, then I can do that. So you have to be mindful of that, because you may be 100% right, but there is going to be a misperception or a bias.
Right.
Especially with high conflict cases, that you are the problem because you can't even keep the same professionals involved over
Right.
and over.
Right. And so I know we're not specifically talking about high conflict cases, but we've kind of mentioned it, alluded to it at least a couple of times here. Yeah. What are your thoughts? And I'm asking you as a legal professional, and if this is an uncomfortable question, don't answer it. Okay. What are your thoughts on a client using the word narcissist or sociopath or deviant or whatever word they use? What does that signal to an attorney if a client comes in and just is going on and on about how their partner is like this total psychopath, total narcissist? Now, we're not talking if there was physical abuse. We're talking, or because we know physical, emotional, financial abuse quite often comes all together as a package. And that absolutely is the stock and trade of this high toxic partner. But how do you come across, and I'm just going to say it, as not looking like you're over dramatizing, kind of blowing this all out of proportion when you're talking to an attorney, especially because these people are not diagnosed. And so it's just kind of, the spouse's opinion as to what.
And that is a great question, because I do a lot of work in this niche practice area, although it seems to be becoming more and more common. But that's for another episode.
Yes.
So, what I ask people is and what I think clients could do, or potential clients could do when they're doing that, and that they feel that is their situation, is come prepared to the meeting with some specifics, right? Here's a list of things that have happened, which is why I am saying these things. You're right. You may not have the bruises, you may not have the text, but you may be able to say, up until 2020, all the accounts were in joint names. I was paying all of the bills for the family, and we had access to everything. And then in the last 4 years, my name's been taken off all of the accounts. I'm not allowed to go with my spouse to the accountant to prepare the taxes. I never see a copy of the return, and I have to ask for money, in order for bills to get paid. Okay, that's far more specific and lends credibility to some of the things that use, because there's every couple of years or even every year in the legal world, there's always these buzzwords, right? So narcissist, sociopath, all of them, abuser, coercive control, these are words that we've heard about. Parental alienation comes in there as one comes to mind. And some of those are valid. They're real. I'm not discrediting any of that. But if you can come with some sort of, presentation or something written down, it doesn't have to be a novel, but just to substantiate why you're saying these things,
Right.
then I think that the person who you're speaking with is going to stop and say, oh, hold on a second. They're not just throwing out terms. They've got some situations that they're explaining to me, which is why they believe this.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then it leads that professional, to ask if they know what they're doing, more questions, right? Okay, like what you said. Have they ever been diagnosed? Do they take any medication? Does anybody in their family have a diagnosis of these types of things, right? How do they interact at work with the kids, with other parents, with neighbors, things like that. Then you could say, okay, so it sounds like maybe we need to do something here to get this actually diagnosed if, your spouse has been resistant. And here's some of the things that we can think about. Here's some of the things that you can do to be better prepared. Keep a diary, right? Keep a log. Start thinking of things contemporaneously so that, you don't have to forget, because people who live in trauma, they forget easily.
Yeah.
And then they're told that they are liars, right?
Yes.
And they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, part of their trauma response is to push away negative memories because, a lot of times people are in disbelief that this is where their life is, or how did they get here, or why are they here, or what have they done, and, things like that. So I think that's the best way.
Yeah, thank you. I think that because that is one thing that I try to recommend to my clients. Like, please don't use these terms. Just say they're really high conflict, or they're challenging to rationalize or reason with. And then, like you say, provide some real specifics. I think that's wonderful information. Sandra, I cannot believe how fast time.
I know. I'm just
sitting like, wow, this is so much information. And that's, again, that's the whole focus of this Spotlight on the Divorce Expert series, is to really be able to take one topic and really cover it completely. So is there anything you think we've missed that we should have included in here about that whole process of hiring a family law attorney?
Just one other thing I would just is make sure that you're clear on fees and, what rates you're going to be charged and how they're going to be billed to you, how often you're going to see a bill, what that bill may look like. Does the firm pay for things like court fees or expert fees, or are those something that you'd be paying separately? Things like that. So that way, when you get that first bill, you're not completely shocked and didn't have a real expectation of what it would look like.
I've got to say, that was the one thing that caught me on my divorce. And this is way back. I mean, cell phones had just started coming out, so text messaging wasn't really a thing. But my attorney said, when I left, call me anytime if you've got a question. Yeah. So I did. Not realizing that even if it was a 2-minute conversation, I was getting billed for 12 minutes or something. I can't even remember. Maybe it was 15. I don't remember, but it was an increment. And I can remember the first time I got the bill, looking at it and seeing all those phone calls. And I had not heard that at all during the conversation. I'm sure he said it. I just didn't hear it. So, being really clear on all that stuff is
really clear. Yes. Because, people we, in family law, even in a calmer case, oftentimes people call and they use their lawyer almost as well as their therapist, like they don't really have an issue or maybe a question, but they want to vent about something. And so, I'll take one or two of those and then I'll say, hey, hold on a second here. Like, this is what's going to happen if we keep having these types of calls. And you need to be mindful of it. So please, maybe go see a therapist. And in certain cases, I may really strongly recommend that, or even not work with a client unless they have a therapist at the same time, because, this is a lot. Nobody gets married hoping to, be in my office or talking to you.
Right. Right.
It's a lot.
And that is something that I don't handle the mental health side, but if people just need to learn how to manage stress and deal with that anger, then I work quite often. And a lot of times when attorneys refer clients to me, it is because they are no longer have the capacity to deal with that emotional overwhelm that the client is dealing with. So Sandra, this has been so informative. I just really want to thank you. And we have to congratulate you because you recently won an award. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. So I have been a New Jersey super lawyer for family law for a couple of years now, but this past year I was actually named as a top 50 women lawyer in the state of New Jersey, which was a nice surprise. So
an amazing accomplishment. And to think that you came on this episode of the Divorce Experts, I so appreciate this. And as you can tell, Sandra is just amazing. She's a great resource. And she is, if I was in New Jersey and I was getting a divorce, I'd be calling Sandra. I can tell you that. So
I appreciate it.
Sandra, thank you so much. Can you just share with us, and I'll make sure this is in the show notes, but if people want to reach out and find out more about your legal services, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so we have a webpage, favalawNJ.com. I also have social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Fava Law LLC on Instagram, and a Facebook page as well.
Wonderful. Again, Sandra, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. And hey, if you are in a divorce, whether you're at the beginning or you're in the middle and you're just realizing now, hey, I really need to have some legal representation, make sure that you do follow these recommendations when you're hiring that professional. So Sandra, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for listening in. And we will, don't forget to check out the next show.